Hey beauties and bees, welcome back to the show. So have you ever looked at a deal, a really good deal, and felt like it was just too good to be true? Like some part of you knew the price didn't make sense, but the part of you looking for a bargain just went along with it anyway. And that feeling is where the story begins. But you know how that feeling ends if you've been here long enough. So let's get into the story of the 50 ringgit house. Today, we're heading to Malaysia, to a neighborhood called Section 2 in Shah Alam, a city in Selangor, about half an hour outside Kuala Lumpur. Shah Alam is an industrial hub and a university city, home to UiTM, which is one of Malaysia's largest public universities. And like any neighborhood built around a campus, it has the kind of ecosystem that grows around students trying to get by on a tight budget. Rental houses, late-night food stalls, the infrastructure of people just trying to make it through their degrees. So this story begins with 8 of those students. The narrator, we will call him John, which is the name used in the original account, had just started at UiTM and couldn't get a hostel place. He and his friends looked around and eventually found a 2-story bungalow in Section 2. 4 bedrooms, 2 floors, 8 students, so 2 to a room, close to campus. It was perfect. And the rent was 50 ringgits a month. For context, at the time, a standard student room near Shah Alam cost somewhere between 200 ringgits and 400 ringgits a month. And 50 ringgits wasn't just cheap. It didn't make sense at all, financially. And still, they signed the lease. There were 3 things John noted when they moved in. And looking back, each one was a warning he didn't recognize until it was too late. The landlord asked for just 50 ringgits as a deposit and told them rent wouldn't start until the 2nd month, meaning the first month was entirely free. And then he told them not to bring too many belongings because it would be exhausting to carry them back out later. But at that time, they just took that as practical advice from a considerate landlord. And then there was the tree. Beside the house stood a very large fig tree called a pokok ara in Malay, and its branches had grown so wide that they were nearly touching the upstairs windows. In Malaysia, the pokok ara carries a reputation that has nothing to do with stories told to frighten children. It's widely understood across communities here that these trees are dwelling places for spirits. The belief is specific. If the branches of a pokok ara are allowed to reach the windows of the house, whatever lives in that tree has a way in. So you're supposed to keep the branches pruned to close that passage. But the landlord said nothing about the tree, and the branches were already scratching at the window panes. And before we go any further, there's one more thing worth understanding, and that's a specific Malay term, keras. It doesn't translate cleanly as haunted. Keras means hard or heavy. A keras place is one with a spiritual weight so strong it pushes back against the living, usually because something on that land was either disturbed, forgotten, or built over without anyone asking what was there before. In older parts of Malaysian cities, this isn't just a concept. Section 2 was developed in the 1970s, and when Shah Alam was being built out rapidly as a planned city, land that had been used for something else became residential streets in a very short window of time. And not everything that was there before was properly documented or cleared. And that wasn't just a general idea in this case. Behind the bungalow, there was a large mound of earth. Nobody mentioned it to the students when they moved in, and at that time, it didn't stand out as anything unusual, just part of the background. And at that time, they didn't think much of it, but we will come back to it. The first night passed without incident. They were busy unpacking and cleaning, staying up late watching DVDs, and nobody slept. And that was fine. First night energy. You know, the excitement of a new place. So yeah, nothing unusual about any of it. The disturbances began on the second day, and they didn't wait for nightfall. It was 10:30 in the morning, and Azmi, the student the group nicknamed Dagu, meaning chin, woke up needing to use the bathroom. The upstairs bathroom was broken, and the landlord had promised to fix it, so Azmi went downstairs. The bathroom door was closed, and someone seemed to be inside, so he waited. But nothing happened. The person inside carried on with their routine, unbothered, so he waited longer. And then he started calling out, telling whoever was in there to hurry up. And his shouting woke the whole house up, and all 8 of them gathered in the downstairs hallway. All 8 of them were standing there, which meant the bathroom was empty. Except the door was locked from the inside, and they could hear the toilet flushing clearly on the other side. So one of the students, Lan, the brave one in the group, the person they consistently turned to when courage was needed, he forced the door open, and there was nothing inside. The lock had been bolted from within, and the bathroom was completely empty. And it was broad daylight. All 8 of them were wide awake, and none of them had an explanation. Azmi never did use the bathroom that morning. That night, things got worse. John was asleep when both his legs were grabbed hard, and he was pulled clean off his bed, hitting his head on the floor with a loud thud. So his immediate assumption was that someone was pranking him. So he got up, ready to get back at whoever had done it, but the room was empty. His roommate Lan was fast asleep on the top bunk, out cold, and John was certain it wasn't him. He walked out to the hall and heard laughter from downstairs. He could see his friends gathered in the living area, watching DVDs. Still slightly dazed from hitting his head, he turned back toward his room. And then something registered that hadn't before. He had seen Lan asleep upstairs just now, but he had also just seen Lan downstairs. He looked back at the bed. There was a shape under Lan's blanket, the outline of a body beneath it. So he pulled the blanket back. Underneath was a cracked tombstone, and the moment he touched that blanket, the room filled with a smell. Damp, rotten, and raw. The kind that hits the back of your throat and makes you want to gag. He ran. The hall was empty. His friends were already outside. Every one of them had been disturbed in their own rooms that night. And not one of them had thought to come wake John up. It was 3 a.m, and they stood outside, trying to figure out what to do. They didn't know where the local imam lived. Their neighbors on both sides were from a different community and couldn't offer the kind of help they needed. Eventually, Saleh, one of the boys, suggested going to Restaurant Hakim, a nearby mamak restaurant. In Malaysia, mamak is a place that serves local food, stays open through the night, and is exactly where you go when you've got nowhere else to be. People sit for hours there over drinks like teh-tarik and ice Milo, and nobody asks you to leave. So it was as safe a place as any at 3 a.m. The only problem was that most of them were in their underwear and sarongs. They had to go back inside to grab clothes, their wallets, and motorbike keys. Bob and Naeem were the only ones with a room downstairs, so everyone borrowed clothes from there. Nobody was willing to go upstairs. Wallets were left behind, so they agreed to pool Naeem's cash, grabbing the motorbike keys from the hook on the wall and heading for the door. As they were filing out, one boy named Wak stopped walking. He was staring at the kitchen door. And standing there was a little girl, smiling and waving at them, like she was seeing them off. John saw her too, and at first he noticed that she had no feet. But then he noticed her face, the color of it, the complete stillness of it. His knees were shaking by the time they reached the restaurant. At Restaurant Hakim, they went around the table. Wak went first. He said that around midnight, while he was on his laptop downloading songs, something struck his window. A sound of small stones hitting the glass. So when he looked out, there was a woman sitting on the branches of the pokokara tree beside the house. Her clothes had once been white, but they were now yellowed and torn. She had long, unkempt hair, and when she saw him looking at her, she smiled. So he shut the window immediately and tried to get to John's room. But there was something waiting for him in the hallway. A child sitting directly in front of his door. So he jumped from the window, landed badly, and dislocated his leg, though he was fortunate not to have broken it. And that's why he limped all the way to the restaurant, which tells you something about how badly he wanted to be anywhere else. Azmi had also seen the little girl, the same one from the kitchen door, waving, no feet. Sam had woken to find something pressed flat against the ceiling, directly above his face, looking straight down at him. And then it was John's turn. He described being pulled off the bed, and then he mentioned seeing his friends watching DVDs in the living room, which was why he hadn't raised the alarm. And Azmi stopped him mid-sentence. Nobody had watched DVDs that morning. Not one of them had touched the DVD player. What John had seen, the laughter, the glow of the screen, the familiar faces of his friends, none of it had been real. Whatever had pulled him off that bed had also created this illusion designed to make him go back upstairs alone. And that is no ordinary hallucination. At some point during all of this, a smell drifted across the table. Azmi had been so frightened that he had wet himself without realizing it, and someone noticed that Sam was wearing two completely different slippers. The fear had been so intense that none of them had paid any attention to what they were putting on their feet. It broke the tension for a moment. They laughed, the kind of laughter that comes from relief, the relief of having escaped something traumatic. Then someone looked around the table and realized that Saleh and Naim weren't there. 6 of them, John, Azmi, Sam, Wak, Bob, and Lan. 2 missing. They had been so caught up in their own experiences, so relieved to be out of that house and sitting under bright lights with other people around, that it hadn't registered until now that they were gone. Bob was the only one who had thought to bring his phone. They tried Naim first. It rang out with no answer, so they tried Saleh, the same. Lan took the phone, held it quietly for a moment, and appeared to recite something under his breath. A verse, a prayer, the kind of thing you reach for when you're not entirely sure what might pick up on the other end of the call. He handed the phone back to Bob and told him to try Naim again, on speaker this time. The ambient noise of the restaurant, the refrigerators humming, a distant TV, sounds drifting out of the kitchen, suddenly felt very far away as Bob dialed the number and put it on speaker. It connected. What came through was not Naim's voice. It was a woman's sound, and the sound coming through the speaker, it wasn't just a scream. It was high-pitched and unraveling, something that almost sounds like laughter, but it isn't. And the scream was not from distress or grief. It was just something performing through the phone from wherever it was calling from. All 6 of them went completely still. The phone stayed on the table, and nobody picked it up, and nobody ended the call. They sat there until the sound stopped. And after that, no one spoke, not a single word between the 6 people sitting at the same table, until the morning call to prayer drifted in through the restaurant's open front. It was the first prayer of the day for Muslims, before sunrise at around 5 or 6 in the morning. That was how long they sat in silence, maybe 2-3 hours, just waiting for daybreak. At 7:30, they went back. The front gate and the front door were both wide open. Laptops, wallets, phones, everything was still inside, completely untouched. They stood outside for 20 minutes or so, and nobody could bring themselves to step through that gate. Then, out of nowhere, they heard a phone ring, but everyone hesitated to answer. The night before, a phone call had put something through that speaker that none of them wanted to hear again. And now, another call. And for a moment, nobody moved. Then Lan answered it. It was Klang Hospital. Naim was in the emergency ward. The hospital had found a missed call from Bob's number on Naim's phone and called back. Naim had been in an accident. John and Sam drove to the hospital. The other stayed behind to look for Saleh. At the hospital, John found Naim in the emergency ward and said the sight of him was hard to take in. His legs had been crushed. The doctor said it was consistent with being run over by a vehicle, a hit and run. The blood loss had already been severe by the time he arrived, and the doctors were direct. There was very little they could do. Naim was holding on by a thread. Sam couldn't look. He stood back with his face turned away, crying without trying to hide it. John sat down next to Naim. Naim was conscious. His eyes were still open and he could still speak, but he kept stopping mid-sentence. The sound of his voice was too quiet to catch. What came through clearly and over again was an apology. He was sorry for causing trouble, sorry for what had happened. The same words repeated, each time a little harder to hear, until eventually they stopped. John stepped away and called the others, and he doesn't describe that call in any detail, and you understand why. Some moments don't need an explanation. He came back to find Sam sitting near the hospital balcony, unable to get up, eyes red and swollen. A little while later, Naim's family began arriving, and John understood that it was time to go. He and Sam got back in the car and drove to Shah Alam. During the drive, John kept returning to something Naim had said to him before any of this had come apart. Naim had told him there was a secret, and that the truth of it could only come from Saleh. He had said it like someone trying to pass something on before they ran out of time. John hadn't understood it then. He was starting to now. Back at the house, a search was already underway. People were going through every room, every corner of the property, and finding nothing. An elderly man in the group suggested calling an ustaz, a religious teacher with the knowledge and authority to deal with situations like this. After the mid-afternoon prayer, they found Saleh. He was sitting on the mound behind the house, still and quiet, just sitting there. The mound had already been searched 5 or 6 times. Nobody had seen him there before. They moved out that same day. There was a rental available in Section 7 near the university's back gate, and they took it immediately. And they brought Naim's belongings with them. Nobody was leaving anything of his behind that house. Before they left, John saw the landlord's face and felt an anger he struggled to contain. The landlord had known the house was Keras, and he had said nothing. The 50 ringgit, the advice about not bringing too many belongings, it all made sense now. John was bedridden with fever for 3 days after they moved, and Naim's body was taken home and buried in Raub, Pahang. About a week later, most of them were recovering, but Saleh wasn't. He complained of body aches that wouldn't go away, and a kind of fatigue that persisted no matter how much he rested. One day, John finally asked him what had happened, because Naim had told him before he died that there was a secret only Saleh could reveal. What Saleh told him changed everything. On the very first day they moved into that house, before the bathroom, before the tombstone, before any of it, Naim and Saleh had gone around to the back of the house and disturbed the mound. Saleh used a garden hoe. Naim scraped at it with his foot, kicking up soil with the side of his shoe. John says he couldn't stop himself from connecting that. Naim's foot dragged through that earth with what he had seen of Naim's legs at the hospital. Then Saleh described what had happened that night. He and Naim had been disturbed in their room downstairs, but it was different for them. Whatever was in that house didn't just appear. It chased them out of the room, through the house, and out onto the main road. They ran without thinking and went straight into the street. And a car hit them. Naim was thrown onto the asphalt, and Saleh landed at the side. A second car came through immediately after and went over Naim's legs. After that, Saleh remembered nothing. Not how he got back to the house. Not how he ended up on that mound. And nothing from the hours in between. 2 things about this still don't have an answer. If Saleh was struck on the main road, how did he end up back on that mound? And why was it Naim who took the full weight of what happened, while Saleh walked away from the road. John had a private theory about that. Naim had disturbed the mound with his foot, and Saleh had used a hoe. He believed the consequence followed the point of contact most directly. He never said it out loud, but then again, he didn't need to. 3 months after sharing his story, Saleh fell ill. His family took him to doctors, and doctors found nothing. No diagnosis, no identified cause. And 3 months after that conversation, Saleh was gone. His family was left without an explanation, and among the friends, no one doubted what it was connected to. The 6 who remained, John, Asmi, Sam, Wak, Bob, and Lan, all finished their degrees at UITM. They carried Saleh's body at the funeral, and John says that moment was one of the hardest things he has ever done. Bob, who had shared a room with Naim, took the longest to find his way back. Naim and Saleh were young men with their whole lives ahead of them. Their friends never forgot them, and neither should we. The story spread widely among Malaysian students online, which could mean it circulated because it was true, because it was a very effective piece of storytelling, or because it was both. They hadn't slept the first night, and group fear in a confined space can do a lot to perception. When 8 frightened people are feeding off each other's anxiety, what they collectively experience can be shaped and amplified in ways that psychologists describe as mass psychogenic illness, which is a well-documented phenomenon where shared stress in a group produces real physical responses and distorted perceptions with no identifiable external cause. The bathroom, though, happened at 10:30 in the morning. 8 people, fully awake, standing in the same hallway in broad daylight. A locked door, a flushing toilet, and an empty room. That particular incident doesn't leave much room for a clear, rational explanation. And the tombstone is harder still. In Malaysia, older land sometimes includes burial sites that predate the houses built over them, absorbed into the city during rapid development without full documentation. So a grave marker turning up in a residential property isn't impossible. But the details, the crack in the stone, the smell, the shape under the blanket, isn't the kind of detail that tends to hold up across multiple retellings if nothing happened. What also stays with people is that John's experience wasn't the only one tied to that house. A man named Mohammed Yusuf had lived in Section 2 since 1980 and was quoted in a Malaysian newspaper saying there were 3 houses in the neighborhood with a haunting reputation, and that he'd been hearing stories about them since the year he first moved in. One of those houses was alleged to have been the site of a violent murder, with a victim hidden inside the walls. He was skeptical of that story until his own son, also a UITM student, rented the 50 ringgit bungalow. His son also had both legs pulled from the bed in the middle of the night and moved out the very next day. The rent, Yusuf noted, hadn't even reached 100 ringgits a month. It was a different tenant, a different year, but the same house and the same experience. This bungalow no longer stands. It sat empty for years after the students left, the walls going dark with moss and nobody staying long enough to matter, until it was eventually torn down. The land it sat on is overgrown now, but people who live nearby say that when walking past the site at night, they sometimes see a figure standing in the weeds, a woman with long hair waving slowly in their direction. The central sections of Shah Alam, developed first in the 1970s, were laid over whatever came before, and whatever came before wasn't always acknowledged or properly cleared. A keras place doesn't become keras by accident. It becomes keras because something on that land wasn't treated with the care it was owed, and because the people who came after were never told why the price was so low. In Malay belief, a grave belongs to someone permanently. The land changes ownership, but the presence does not. The landlord knew that. The 50 ringgit wasn't a gesture of generosity. The warning about not bringing too many belongings wasn't practical advice. It was an exit strategy built into the lease. offered by someone who understood exactly how long his tenants were likely to stay. Before we go, I want to ask you something. Have you ever agreed to something, a place, a situation, a deal, and only realized afterward that the person on the other side knew something they chose not to tell you? If that question sits with you tonight, or if this story reminded you of something, you know where to find us. And if you're brave enough to go digging through whatever's growing on that plot of land in section 2, it's apparently still yours for the taking. Good night, guys, and see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.